Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast and video interviews of the Cleft Palate Craniofacial Journal. And before I even start, I want to let you know that at some point you might hear a baby cry, you might hear a puppy bark, or you may hear fire engines because I am right down the street from one of the biggest fire engine departments in the city of New York. So that being said, welcome. And I think that you'll really enjoy this interview. As a nurse practitioner myself on a cleft and craniofacial team, I'm always interested in reading about issues with our patients that are not usually what I'm thinking about on a daily basis. I think it does really help me understand what the other members of the team are dealing with and how we can help best care for our patients comprehensively. So the paper that I really was just very happy to read and think it's something that everyone on a cleft team should read is Reading Development in Children with Non-Syndromic Cleft Palate with or without cleft lip, Meta-Analysis and Systematic Review. And this paper was in the September 2022 Cleft Palate Craniofacial Journal, which is volume 59, number 9, pages 1155 to 1166. And the authors are Hope Sparks Lancaster, Kari Lean, Jordan Haas, Paige Ellis, and Nancy Scher. And Kari, Jordan, Paige, and Nancy are all SLPs, or Jordan and Paige are actually working on that. And Hope is has a PhD in hearing and speech sciences. And when they were working on this, they were at, and some are still at, Boys Town National Research Hospital, Arizona State, and Barrow Neurological Institute. And I'm always glad to see multiple authors working together. I think it just brings a lot of depth to the paper. So thank you, Hope, for joining me. And I wanted to start out by asking you, and I usually start this with all the authors, is what, there's so many different things that you can study, and as a researcher, you've done a lot. What made your group want to take a look at this?
Yeah, so in 2020, my group, so me, Kari, and Nancy, as well as some other authors, published a big meta-analysis in the Journal of Speech, Language, and Hearing Research on the speech and language development in children with non-syndromic cleft palate with or without cleft lip, birth to about age 5 or 8. And we had wanted to include reading in that meta-analysis, but that meta-analysis got so big so fast that we were like, oh my goodness, there's so much here to talk about with just speech development and language development that reading, which is one of my personal research interests, just couldn't fit. It just didn't fit in that meta-analysis. So we took reading and put it to the side and did it as its own little paper. And reading, I came to working with children with cleft palate from a background of language disorders and reading disorders first. And that's always been my primary interest, partially because I have a reading disorder. So I'm always thinking about how other populations might also struggle with reading and thinking about that.
Interesting. So you said that you had a reading disorder. Was it something that was picked up early on, or how? I'm always interested in knowing, because I think that there are probably lots of people who have reading issues and it's never detected.
We probably should have known early on. I never passed a single spelling test as a child. But I also never received any support as a child. I wasn't really I didn't receive any like, hey, Hope, I think you have a reading and writing disability, until I was actually in my postdoctoral work, really after my graduate program, when one of my mentors was like, Hope, you struggle more than anybody would expect with reading for somebody with a PhD, and why didn't you like share that you have some problems with this stuff? And it's kind of like, oh, because I didn't really realize that I was struggling that much more than everybody else.
But you must have been working so hard through that PhD.
So very, very hard.
Like that. Like that.
Yeah, so that's my interest with reading and language has always been kind of driven by my own struggles, even if I didn't realize that I was working like 3 times as hard as my peers.
Amazing. So let's talk about the paper and maybe give the listeners a bit of an overview, and then we can talk about some of your findings and what things maybe you were surprised at or maybe you weren't, and then of course talking about next projects. And as you said, there's so much to all of these that breaking them down into smaller projects is a really good idea, and I
Yeah.
think also helps so many students as they're studying to get involved in projects like this. So let's maybe give you a chance to give us an overview.
So we wanted to know, what does reading look like in children with non-syndromic cleft palate? Um, Reading is an important aspect of a child's life, especially here in America, but worldwide. Literacy is very important. Learning to read is a key part of school. And if you're struggling to read, you might have problems in the classroom or struggle to make friends, or even later on, struggle with long term quality of life if you're not literate. Uh, and of course, I hope that everybody develops some sort of enjoyment of reading at least. But there's remarkably little research on reading in children with cleft palate. A lot of focus on speech and surgery results, which of course is absolutely necessary, but those things then trickle down to affect other problems, um, or other areas of life, including reading development. And so we wanted to look at what was out there on reading and what that could tell us about where these kids are, what we already know about, and then use that information to inform clinical guidance, but also to help us figure out what are the next steps in the research world. Like, what do we need to look at next to better understand this area?
So in your research, you came to it with two specific questions.
Yes.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so we wanted to know if children differed on measures of pre-reading or general reading, and if there was any evidence that characteristics of the child, age, socioeconomic status, speech language functioning, or hearing moderated those performances. Um, so the pre-reading skills are these very early skills. They're things like being able to name letters, play with sounds and words. We call the mainly we were interested in phonological awareness, which for English readers is very important for reading success, and that's the ability to play with sounds and words. And then general reading is more advanced skills like decoding words, spelling, reading comprehension. Those are the things we're actually going to learn about in school. Um, And so we were able to find 11 studies that measured either pre-reading or general reading. And the second question we wanted to, as in our original meta-analysis, our bigger one in JSLHR, we wanted to look at some of these possible moderators, because as children get older, they should get better at reading. Well, do we also see that in cleft? Sometimes there's some evidence that a lack of resource or more resources can help or hinder reading development. So, socioeconomic status as a proxy to access to resources. Language is actually really important. Oral language skills are really important for reading success. So, do children who have better language have better reading outcomes? Kathy Chapman once published, and we included this paper in our meta-analysis, a paper that showed that children who had significant speech problems were the ones who were most at risk for reading problems in children with cleft palate. So we want to include that. And hearing, hearing is always this big, like what is the role of hearing in children with cleft palate, playing on their speech skills, on their language development, on their reading? for research question 2, we were actually not able to do the analysis. We wanted to do a moderator analysis, which is what we did in our first paper. We did more of the systematic review and looked for what evidence there was to suggest that age, SES, speech language functioning, or hearing status might play. But we couldn't look at those things statistically because the sample of articles was so small.
So in terms of your questions, I read that you also had a couple, you went in with some hypotheses.
Yeah.
And what were they, and what was the end result of that? What did you prove them or not?
Yes. So reading from the paper, because I have to remind myself what I exactly said. That
That's fine.
Yeah.
I have mine. It's okay.
Exactly. Children would perform on average poorer than their non-cleft peers on our measures, especially phonological awareness, and on average also poorer on measures of general reading. So we did find some support for our hypotheses. Roll down to my favorite table, or I guess we didn't put these into a table. So in the results, we talk about what we found, and not all of our tests were significant. So we didn't necessarily find all support for all of this. When we looked at pre-reading as a whole, that wasn't statistically significant. But when we looked at phonological awareness specifically, it was also not. But there was a time when we were first looking at phonological awareness and we found some new studies, and that kind of shifted where we went. So it does seem, I thought those would be the really impacted areas, honestly. I thought pre-reading and phonological awareness, because those can be so driven by speech skills. I really thought that was going to be what would be significant. And it wasn't. And we have a wide range of effect sizes. And so meta-analyses focus on what we call effect sizes, which are like the clinical difference between two groups. So not just, they have a mean of this and they have a mean of Y, but like they're this far apart, and is that difference clinically meaningful or not? And we have such a wide variation that's why these weren't significant.
So in terms of what you did find, was there anything that was really surprising? Anything else that either you didn't expect or,
Sorry, I misspoke. Pre-reading was significant. It had a p-value of 0.01, but phonological awareness specifically was not. So the surprising thing was that for me, the surprising thing that was that the effect sizes for phonological awareness were not significant, because I really thought that was going to be the key. Pre-reading overall, there is a significant difference between children with cleft and children who are non-cleft peers, but it wasn't driven just by phonological awareness, which is what I thought we were going to find. Yeah.
So let's see, what did I want to focus on? Oh, I know. I am always interested in the effect of socioeconomic status on things like hearing and speech, and reading is another one. It didn't seem that you found much there.
Yeah, what we did find was that only 7 of our studies reported anything about socioeconomic status, so not quite enough to do much with it. what we saw were 4 reported Hollinghead scores and 3 reported samples of parental education, which is kind of like a proxy measure. It's not even necessarily a great measure. And we didn't really, the studies didn't separate out those scores by like low SES, high SES. They were just like, our samples SES is this. So there wasn't much we could do with that. And so really what I conclude there is that that's an area of research that could be done, but, could be improved. And for children with cleft palate, really what are the resources or lack thereof, and what are their impacts on speech and language? And we kind of found that in our big meta-analysis too, that there's just not, at least for speech and language and reading functioning, there's not everybody's reporting SES consistently or breaking it out by SES, which leaves us with not a way to sort of synthesize all of the research information and make some sort of bigger statement about like children with cleft palate who are low SES or X or Y. Right now, it's kind of a question mark.
I have when I was reading your conclusions with my trusty highlighter, where I'm just highlighting all over the place, you found that children with non-syndromic cleft palate with or without cleft lip perform more poorly than peers without clefts on measures of reading skills. I thought this was interesting, although on average, performance would not qualify for reading services. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because that's one of the things that is interesting to me is, if something is recognized, but it's not enough of a problem, then you don't get services. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, in the schools, that is correct. So
that to me is like, I put a little star on that when I think, well, what can we as members of cleft teams do to support this issue? Because I think a lot about when our SLP would either write a letter herself or come to me as the provider to add additional info in order for a child to get additional speech services in the school. So when I read that about reading, it made me think, about the challenges that I think we as teams and definitely parents can have on getting support when you identify something like this. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Let me gather my thoughts for a second. What can teams and parents do? I mean, being aware that these kids are at risk for possible reading problems and staying on top of that, like with parents and with SLPs, there's no need to pathologize normal development. So, maybe they're just a little bit behind or one thing, but there's also nothing wrong with providing extra support to make sure that they can achieve their full potential. Reading is not a natural skill. It's not, we're not biologically wired to read the same way we are biologically wired for spoken or signed language. That
Interesting.
That we're biologically wired. Reading is actually, I like to refer to it as sort of the parasite skill. It comes in and it usurps parts of your visual processing and your auditory processing and your language processing, and even kind of taps into some motor stuff. And it's pulling from a lot of different places in your brain and to accomplish that. And so if you have any possibility of being at risk, reduced speech skills, delay in acquisition of speech sounds, which then delays the development of speech perception or fine-grained speech perception, that's going to have big cascades in your development for reading. And reading really does need to be taught explicitly. So just like around the kindergarten age, be like, or a preschool age even, be like, let's just keep on top of this.
Right.
Let's go ahead and be like, how's your kid doing at phonological awareness skills? How's their segmenting of sounds and blending of sounds, any concerns there? If not, maybe, kind of think about how that can be supported through explicit teaching. And yeah, encouraging if they've already got an IEP through the school, why not tack on a reading goal there? It's language.
Right, right. I think for me, one of the things that I remember during annual visits with our Cleft team is asking the family how the kids are doing with speech. Do they need any more speech therapy? Were there any additional issues? But not so much asking about reading. So it would be, to me, something to easily add on. Well, first, anticipatory guidance on that as part of your, as you know, in that at the preschool time. But adding on to that as something that you can easily do in your annual visits, or whenever you're meeting with them. So I thought that was something that I think is important, for that, something that we could incorporate, something that I learned from this paper that I would incorporate, or suggest to my SLP that would be something to add in if it's not already being done. So now, you talked in the beginning about how you had to sort of break things up and do this as a separate study. Are there any other things we're looking at? Are you working on other things now in the area of reading? Sounds like it's the area that you love. I have to say, one of the most wonderful things about being retired is the amount of reading I can do and not have to worry, got to go to work, got to do this. It's a wonderful thing. And it's interesting that, there are just people just approach reading in a very different way. Some see reading as a chore, which for me, it's just one of my very favorite things. So I'm very sensitive about reading. So anything to look forward to in the future from your group or from you?
In Cleft Palate specifically, or reading in general?
Both, actually.
Well, so for Cleft Palate specifically, Kari and I are actually working on finishing up another meta-analysis that was a part of this whole group. We've presented on it at the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association before. It was actually Paige's sort of honors, one of her mentored undergraduate projects on the correlation between speech and language skills and children with cleft palate. So we're working on getting that done and out as a manuscript. We found stronger correlations between speech ability and vocabulary size.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very interesting. I'm continue to collaborate with Dr. Scher, Nancy, on various projects related to intervention, language and speech intervention in children with cleft. I've working on collecting data right now to further interrogate the pieces that all of my meta-analyses have pointed me at in children with cleft palate, and really kind of building up a model of how does speech development in these children impact their language and reading development in a more systematic and forward-thinking way in an experimental design, and comparing them to children who have an articulation or phonological disorder, as opposed to just not non-cleft peers, which we usually mean typically developing normal speech, normal language, but kids who have a speech problem that arises from a non-anatomical reason, but more of a neurological reason. And over in more of my reading in general world, I am finishing up, putting on the last touches for another. I did a large genetics study where I looked at the genetic contributions to reading ability in 2 cohorts that come from different ethnic ancestry backgrounds, and the overlap and how common it is, we're seeing the same drivers regardless of ancestry.
So do you sleep at night? I mean, you're so busy, plus having a baby. My goodness, it's.
Oh, I guess I also forgot to say that I'm as a part of my lab right now. The big focus at my lab is developing a remote adult language experiment tool to be used for large-scale studies of behavior and genetics of language and reading. Wow. Yes, I sleep like 10 hours at night with that. The little baby just kind of like cuddles up and we sleep.
Love it. Love it. So let me just end our conversation with asking you to give some advice. I mean, you're a researcher, and I know that a lot of the members of our organization, a lot of the people who read papers and, hopefully are joining these podcasts and interviews, is to try to, get some, advice, some words of wisdom from more experienced researchers when you're, trying to think about something to study and working with a group. What advice do you have for them?
Gosh, a lot of research is resilience and persistence. You're gonna fail a lot and you're gonna get rejected a lot. So successful researchers, it's not about having a thick skin, but a bouncy skin.
I love
Uh,
it.
you know, you don't need to be not emotional. You just need to be able to like bounce yourself back up, pick up, take breaks, drink plenty of water.
I love it. I love it. I
Yeah, and I
think
think
that's important.
yeah, you'll and if you're really excited about the topic, you'll produce good work.
Well, on that note, I wanted to reintroduce this paper, which can be found in the September 2022 Cleft Palate Craniofacial Journal. The paper is Reading Development in Children with Non-Syndromic Cleft Palate with or without Cleft Lip, Meta-Analysis and Systematic Review. And the authors are Dr. Hope Sparks Lancaster, Dr. Carrie Lean, Jordan Haas, Paige Ellis, and Dr. Nancy Scher. And they worked on this while at Boys Town National Research Hospital in Omaha, Arizona State, and Barrow Neurological Institute. This is on pages 1155 and to 1166. And I have to show you, I ripped it out and I was reading. I just took it with me, reading it wherever I went. So I want to thank you, Hope, for taking the time to join me during this, crazy busy holiday season, plus having a baby. And to everyone who is listening or watching, I hope that you all have a really happy and memorable holiday season and take good care of yourselves. So thank you so much for joining. Thanks, Hope.
Thank you, Pat. It was fun.
Appreciate it.